Good news, everyone! Resident Evil 7 is coming to Switch. Bad news, it's only being streamed. This is kind of bad, guys. I really don't want to see this happen, but here we go. The Nintendo Switch is pretty new still. It's only about a year old, and there are a lot of really great experiences on it. And Nintendo has proven that they're capable of making amazing games with a limited hardware. But this doesn't mean that other developers want to do that. And Resident Evil 7 proves that theory. The folks at Capcom are bringing Resident Evil 7 to the Nintendo Switch, but instead of actually having the game run off the Nintendo Switch hardware, what they're doing is they're giving you a small download file that will stream the game from a much more powerful PC. This purchase that you're going to be doing, which is going to range in price by the time it comes to North America, is actually going to be a one-cost purchase of a 180 ticket stream of the game. That means that when you buy the game, you only get to stream it for 180 days, and then I guess you have to buy the game again. Now, there's a reason why they're doing this, folks. Streaming games is actually pretty expensive, so they can't actually just give you a game for indefinite terms to stream forever, because otherwise they would lose a lot of money. That's why Netflix charges you every month for a streaming fee, because they need to do that in order to keep the server costs up. And if they were suddenly to sell, I don't know, about 500,000 copies of this Resident Evil 7 game, and 500,000 people started streaming it all at once, it would probably be very expensive and very taxing on their servers. So it's something that they have to limit, at least the way that they make this work right now. Now, personally, if you were to ask me, I'd have to say that this was a pretty bad move. Mostly because I believe that game developers should be taking games that they're making from other systems and porting them over to the Switch. Even at the cost of some reduced graphics performance, it would be far better to have the game running this way. And there's a bunch of reasons why you shouldn't want streaming games on the Nintendo Switch. And a big one is, as I imagine many of you out there actually play the Nintendo Switch outside of your homes, having a portable system that has bound streaming games means you have to be in an internet connection where it has a fairly stable and fast performance. And realistically, that's not for everyone. And I know there's a couple of you out there just saying stuff like, "It doesn't matter where I stream the game as long as I have a pretty good internet connection from my cell phone or even from a Starbucks." Okay, sure, maybe, but actually no, not at all. In realistic terms, you're not going to be able to stream games that easily. It kind of works like this. When you play a movie file off of Netflix, that's a pre-recorded movie file at a set time. So that means when you go to stream something, it buffers in the RAM or the memory of your computer or whatever it is you're using, and it kind of just stays there. Sometimes when you're watching a movie on Netflix and your internet cuts, you actually have like maybe a couple of minutes to keep watching the movie because the system already knows what the rest of the movie's going to look like because, again, it's a pre-recorded file. But when you stream a video game, it doesn't work that way. You have to stream something as it's happening on the system. That means that not only do you have to have a computer or some kind of hardware running the game at whatever graphics that they want it to run at, but you also have to be controlling the game at the exact same time. So a really inconsistent connection means that you're not going to be able to get the best performance out of playing the game, and it would just kind of suck. And on top of all that stuff, they also have this thing called loss of quality that happens, which you've probably seen when watching a Netflix movie on very low resolution screens, and maybe even just bad internet connections in general. And when that happens, that means that the actual look of the game is gonna look really, really bad because it's being streamed at you and it's being compressed. Kinda sucks. Now, there's a bunch of you out there that are probably really upset at Capcom right now because you probably think they're up in their high offices screaming, "Give us your money!" Okay, maybe that is what's going on. But more realistically, I think Capcom wants to get their games working on the Switch, but it's just really difficult. You see, the Nintendo Switch is not that powerful of a system compared to its contemporaries. And that doesn't mean that it's just so totally unusable, but it just is a lot less powerful because it's portable. And because of that, game developers are going to struggle bringing their games over. And I know a bunch of you are thinking that the Nintendo Switch has sold tons and tons of copies, so of course a whole bunch of people are going to be wanting to get their games ported over there, but it still is a cost measure. And they might be scared about their games being released on the Switch and not making their money back. Many of you may remember a game called Ghostbusters that was released on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and the PC. The game had a mixed reception upon its arrival, but it was a very visually interesting game. When they went to go make that same game on the Wii, They couldn't. So they made a completely different version of Ghostbusters on the Wii that had different graphics and different assets. And when that happened, suddenly people started to realize the Wii simply might not be up to the task of running modern video games. And then a little while later, we started seeing games come out on a bunch of other platforms that didn't come out on the Wii. I think the same thing is gonna happen with the Switch. The Switch is very cool for right now, but in a couple of years, it's just not gonna measure up. A whole bunch of developers are making games for the PlayStation 4 first because there's just a lot more PlayStation 4s out there in the wild. And when they're making a game, they want to sell to the people that have the biggest audience. But when it comes to the Switch, it still isn't that far ahead. So they have to make a whole bunch of games work somehow at the lowest cost possible. And streaming a game is probably one of those ways. Nintendo has made some announcements regarding their Switch Online service recently, and I think a couple people out there may be considering that, well, instead of actually charging a certain amount for a game like this, why doesn't Nintendo just include streamable games on their online service, just the way that they're going to be streaming NES games to you? Well, I think there's a reason why that's not going to happen. The Nintendo Switch Online service is going to be streaming NES games, maybe SNES games, possibly Nintendo 64 games, and those games themselves are very, very small. Think of it this way, if you were to stream just a couple of minutes of a Netflix video, it would actually take far more data than what Nintendo would need to send you a package of ROM files you would download directly to your Switch to play on some built-in emulator on the system. This is probably why Nintendo hasn't offered other games, or at least mentioned offering other games to stream to your system, because it probably wouldn't work very well. I think that this is the kind of stuff that's technically very hard to comprehend, because when it comes to streaming video games, it's just a lot more difficult. And I also believe this is why we haven't seen Sony really work that much on their PlayStation Now service, because, well, the service isn't all that great. It's incredibly expensive, and it's very limiting on what you can play. And I don't think that Nintendo really wants to enter that same realm, so that's why Capcom's probably doing this themselves. They probably believe offering that certain pay-per-view experience for a little short amount of time to play a game is better than actually porting the game completely, because it would cost a lot and they probably wouldn't see a return on that investment. There's probably a bunch of Nintendo fans out there watching right now that are probably upset with the concept that other companies are going to try and do this exact same thing with their games. But I wouldn't worry. I don't believe Resident Evil 7 is going to be popular, especially in a streaming mode, because, well, a lot of you out there don't play your Switches at home, you play them on the bus, you play them on the train, you play them out in public. And to have a stable internet connection to actually play this kind of game makes it very difficult to play. And imagine you're playing a game and streaming it somewhere and suddenly your internet connection dies, well then you lose your save state and all that. I don't think this is going to make a very smart move for Nintendo or any other company that wants to do it in the future. This is just a test to see if the market is there, and I believe you guys are going to vote with your dollars and show them that it's not there. Realistically, I think any game developer out there that has a large game can bring it down and make it work on the Nintendo Switch. They just need to be willing to make it happen. And even though it might be a little costly, they may see a return with the Nintendo Switch's audience. But just like with the Wii and the Wii U, where third-party sales started to fall after a couple years, we might see the same thing happen with the Nintendo Switch. And if that does, well, that's not going to be good news.